Now, before we begin, you may notice when we turn the cameras on that we have changed our set. It's now super professional and in a bedroom instead of the kitchen.
I would like to call it a studio.
What did I call it?
Bedroom?
Oh, well, it is a bedroom.
It's a studio.
It is now a studio.
The camera. Why are you looking at the camera? The camera's wrong.
Oh, that's right. It's now a studio.
Okay, everybody. We have a brand new location.
We do.
We have left the kitchen.
We are in the bedroom.
The studio.
The studio.
We're big time now, Tim.
That's right. We have a window that we can open and close.
That's right. With sound padding.
So you can't hear the dogs slurp their water.
Let's begin the show. Hi, my name is Rick.
My name is Tim.
And this is...
Break It Down with Rick and Tim.
The hell's going on?
It's a good question.
I'm glad I'm Italian. I'm not white.
You kind of are.
Why does it have to be the big chicken? Why does it have to be the big chicken?
Why do you have to say it like that? I was right. And
Yes.
You were racist.
It's Britney, bitch.
I still have a belief that Sasquatch is out there, but that doesn't make me crazy. And you give me that face, and this is my issue with you. You're a questionable person.
This is a podcast where Rick, a Generation Xer, and Tim, a millennial, come together and try to find answers to our changing world.
Break It Down with Rick and Tim. All right.
Tonight's topic is critical race theory.
That's right. CRT.
The great white replacement. White fragility. White rage.
It's a lot of white.
Yeah. The hell's going on?
It's a good question.
I'm glad I'm Italian. I'm not white.
You kind of are.
All right, fine. My mother's English.
Right. Well, let's break it down in this episode with Rick and Tim. What is critical race theory? I think that's a good question to answer first.
Well, you're a teacher.
Right.
You teach at a private school.
Right.
It's not public.
It is a private school. It is a private non-profit. We do serve the public school children, though.
And
Students.
we live in a blue state.
We do.
Have they given you any certain guidelines into what you can and cannot teach as a teacher?
No, I can teach whatever I want at my school.
No.
I have full autonomy over my classroom, which is something that public school teachers do not have.
So if you were teaching high school at a public
Uh-huh.
high school, that would be different then.
It would be different. There would be topics that I could talk about and topics that I'd have to kind of steer the conversation away from and be like, maybe you should talk to your parents about that or your adult, whoever that is.
Wow.
Yeah, it's rough.
We're going to start off this highly controversial topic with Let's Quiz Tim.
Oh, boy.
All right, Tim. Tim,
Rick.
in what year did people of color get to start voting as Americans?
1970.
Just 52 years ago?
Not very long ago.
You mean to tell me Martin Luther King could not vote? You said 1970.
1870.
1870 now makes sense.
It's
Oh,
been a
my
long
God.
week at my job. I work at an alternative high school.
What amendment gave black people the right to vote?
The 15th Amendment.
Very good. What day is Juneteenth?
The 19th of June.
Excellent.
Honestly, that was the only one I really was confident in the answer to.
Don't reveal that.
Why?
Because people are going to think you're smart.
I know they're going to think I'm smart, but I want to point out to the fact that, like, that was not part of my, like, history.
Oh,
growing
nor
up.
mine either. We talked about this before the show.
Right,
and,
we did. We educated ourselves.
my public high school experience from the 1980s to 1990, we talked about slavery, we talked about Abraham Lincoln, the Civil War, and then moving on, now it's World War I. So nothing about what happened in Galveston, Texas.
Right.
The Juneteenth holiday now, thank you, Joe Biden, commemorates an effective end of slavery in the United States. It's short for June 19th.
Right.
Which you got in Let's Quiz Tim.
I did.
It marks the day when federal troops arrived in Galveston, Texas. What is wrong with you guys in Texas? What you guys are just In 1865, to take control of the state and ensure that all enslaved people be freed. Slavery was abolished on January 1st, 1863, and it took 2 years for Texas to get off its ass?
I was never taught that in high school and or grade school and or any school. I didn't know that.
They had newspapers. They had trains. 2 years. Wow.
Right?
Good old Texas never lets us down.
Do you know the real story of Rosa Parks?
Yes, she was tired and she had worked a long day and she sat on the bus in the front because that was the only available seat. And the rest is history.
That is not the story of Rosa Parks. That is the story of Rosa Parks that we learned, but that is not the story of Rosa Parks. Did you know that?
Oh, no.
You had no idea?
Oh, my God.
I'm sorry. 5 minutes. Real quick, for those of you who don't know the real story of Rosa Parks, it was a planned situation.
What?
It was. It was organized. Rosa Parks was not an old lady. She was in her 40s. And she wasn't sitting on the front of the bus. She was sitting right at the barrier between the front of the bus and the back of the bus, right in the middle. And she was sitting on a bench. And the rule was that if one white person decided to sit on that bench, all the black people had to get off that bench. And the bench is seated 5 people, or so on and so forth about that. And so they found the right bus, timed it at the right time when they knew that it would be crowded and that somebody might ask her to move. And she said, yes, she was tired, but it's not tired, physically exhausted from work. It's tired of being asked to move on the bus. It was planned and organized by an organization. That started the boycott. It was planned. But I didn't learn that until just this year.
Wow.
I am 33. That is a piece of history that I was lied to about for so many years. I heard it from a black woman.
Was she a teacher?
Yes, of sorts. She was in our diversity training, and she was the best person for it. And she did an amazing job.
Fake Black History That Way Too Many People Believe, Part 3, the Rosa Parks edition. Number 1, many people believe that Rosa Parks was tired and worn out after a long day's work, and that story is completely false. She said in her autobiography that she was not physically tired at all. She was just tired of giving in.
I want to remind you that at one point, Trump outlawed that kind of training in the federal government. Now, Joe Biden came in and said, we're doing away with that restriction.
Wow.
So we got a little lucky there. But yeah, there's a whole history that I was just given just a snippet of, and that snippet was wrong.
History is written by the winners.
Yes.
Now imagine if African Americans wrote our history.
It would be different.
We would know about Juneteenth.
Right. And the other thing is, and going back, and I think I might have said this at one point but never got into it, but the reality of it is the reason why we need to teach this, the reason why we can't as white people decide that it's enough to just, call it good, is because we don't experience the systemic racism every day like these people do.
Well, yeah, because
like
we
our
have
communities
we
of color,
have the privilege
right?
of being white.
Right. So saying that we're going to look at things from a colorless lens is almost a mockery to our communities of color because we're still treating them very poorly. And that is evident in our data.
Yes.
State of housing report, right. Crime report.
Right.
Back to the questions. Number 3. What are we on?
Oh, that was it. But I also wanted to talk about, since we're talking about critical race theory, book banning, according to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, I want you to guess numbers. You're really good with numbers, Tim.
Pretty decent with
yeah,
numbers.
You don't even get me about how many feet to the mile and all that because
Yeah.
it's
Sure.
embarrassing.
Sure.
What do you think, as of October of this year, what is the percentage of black inmates in our prisons compared to white inmates?
So I'm going to say that I want to say that now you have to be careful here with these numbers because is it the percent ratio to like population or is it the percentage of prisoners in a prison?
It's the prisoners in the prison.
I want to say around like 30%.
Oh my God, Tim. As of October of this year, there are 60,922 black inmates, 38.4%.
38.4. So a little like close to
Very
40%. Goodness gracious, it's gone up.
Whites, there's 91,313, 57.6%.
Yeah, I was going to say around 60%.
But when you look at the population based on the 2020 census, which somebody we know did,
Right.
who was a part of that,
That was me. I did that. It was very boring and very hot. Lost my mind.
right now there's currently 231.9 million Caucasian people in our country.
White people.
Yes.
Yeah.
There are 41.6 million black people.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the numbers. That's insane.
So for those viewers out there who don't understand those numbers, what we're saying here is that what percentage of the population in the United States is black? Now, we can do that, and I can give you a little stats lesson, or we can just take a pause real quick, run the numbers, and I can tell you exactly that number. What do you want to do?
Well, here it says that nationally, 1 in 81 black adults in the United States is serving time in state prison.
Right. Well, so let's look at this from just a percentage point of view. If they make up 30, almost 40% of the prison population, what percent of the United States population is black? And then how does that compare to the population that's black in prisons? It'll be very telling.
Okay.
So the United States, the population in the United States was what?
Of blacks, 41.6 million, and whites, 231.9 million.
So of the entire United States population, black people make up about 13.5%, roughly. And so compare that to the percent of the population in prisons. Now, in the perfect world, it would just be 13.6% because it should just flow back and forth. There should be as many black prisoners as there are white prisoners as their ratio is in the actual population. But that's not the case. It's nearly double. Well, actually, it is. It's more than double. It's double and a half.
Wow.
Which is insane, which means that we as a community are not serving our communities of color. We're imprisoning them.
Right. Recently, Joe Biden is talking about making marijuana an offense that can be erased. What's he talking about on the news? He was talking about
expunged.
Expunged.
So the war on crime, and this goes back to Democrats are they don't have clean hands at all either. The war on drugs, that was mainly designed to get the populations of color under control, kind of. Well, in a sense, because they targeted communities of color and they took marijuana and made it like one of the biggest felonies. And so it disproportionately affected communities of color because they were already over-policed, and now they can say, okay, you have a little bit of marijuana on you, you're going to jail. Easy.
So with this expunging these people's records
Right.
for marijuana in prison, the numbers are going to drastically drop.
Yeah, I want to say that it's like over 50% of the people that are in our prison systems are in prison because of
me?
like
50?
I want to say, well, let's look it up. So when it says 45.2, now that is all drug crime, but a big percent of that is marijuana.
Probably half.
Probably
I would
half,
guess.
probably more than half. Although, yeah, I would say probably more than half
Because marijuana is easier to get
easier
than
to get.
LSD and heroin and fentanyl and
yeah,
all the others.
yeah,
But then there's also crystal meth, which is easily accessible now.
right. Well, and you have all these low-level offenders that are just in possession. They're not
Right.
dealers. They're not, people who are causing harm in the community necessarily.
The United States has the highest record of incarceration in the entire world.
Right. We have the highest prison population.
Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
This includes Latinos, Native Americans, and Asians. Asians have a very small number in our prisons, 2,296, 1.4%. That's clear to me that Asians are not socioeconomically oppressed and challenged as people of color are.
You're right. They aren't.
The numbers right there.
The data show.
Right.
It's funny because, but you have to understand too that includes not just like China, Japan, Korea. That includes like the Philippines, Indonesia, India, things of that nature. So when I show a graph of the housing,
and we talked about this on the previous
when I show the
episode.
graphs of the housing, when you scroll down, you'll get to Asian households. And it's not like white households where it's all green. There's still some red there. And my students were like, I don't understand. I thought that the Asian people were doing much better, because we were looking at other graphs and it showed, the demographics of Asian Americans, then their wealth just going up, skyrocketing. I was like, well, you have to remember, like, we have a lot of Asian refugees here too. Like, we had, in the 60s, my father was working as a teacher in San Francisco, and he had a bunch of Cambodian refugees because of the war in Vietnam and the wars that were happening in Cambodia. So there's also another side to, the Asian population that a lot of people don't think of. When you think of Asian population, you think of, smart.
Just this topic alone, talking about the numbers of people of color in our prison systems, is taboo in the education of certain red states like Florida, Texas.
Right. You see,
Virginia.
I wonder if I were to show that chart in Florida, would I lose my job?
Probably.
If I explain
Yes.
to the student, because here's the reality of it. The reason I show my students that chart in my class, and I show it to them in a lot of my classes, sometimes not even my statistics class, just because we get on the topic of race, because it affects them all. And I tell them, look, this is the example of what people are scared of and what people are scared of us teaching you. Here's systemic racism. Boom, in the chart, in the numbers, in our system of home ownership and renting. In this case, renting, right? And I ask my students, what is the American dream? It's owning a house and a white and a picket fence. Really, the American dream is owning property, because that is where wealth is. And wealth is then generated from that property, and it's passed on through generations.
Yes.
And so when we talk about systemic racism, like when I talk about the GI Bill, I talk about when black soldiers came back, they were denied the housing vouchers from the GI Bill. When they were building subdivisions and suburbia stuff out here around where we live, the banks would only give loans to developers if they had it in their development clause that they would only sell the houses to Caucasian families.
If that isn't systematic, I don't know what
Right?
is.
But that's the thing, are we supposed to stop teaching our students that exists? Are we just not supposed to point it out? The idea is to look at it from this colorless lens, right? And I don't quite understand how that works, because we don't live in a colorless society.
Well, there's white fragility, and we don't want to make our children feel guilty over something that happened 200 years ago.
Well, then how about we make them feel guilty about what we're doing to them now?
Right. Now, critical race theory isn't something new. It's been around a while. Mm-hmm. And I have some history here.
And when I say them, I mean our communities of color. I want to be clear.
Right. So the Great White Replacement Theory was spread in 2011 by French author Renaud Camus. He stated, and I'm paraphrasing here, that French and white European populations are being demographically and culturally replaced by non-white peoples. In his book, Le Grand Replacement.
Le Grand Replacement.
Right. He associates the presence of Muslims in France with the danger and destruction of French culture and civilization. His words, genocide by substitution. Now, before him in 1973, another French author, Jean Raspail, wrote a novel titled The Camp of the Saints. It's an apocalyptic tale that attempts to depict the destruction of white Western society at the hands of mass immigration from the global South. His novel took hold among American white supremacist and anti-immigrant groups in the 1980s and 90s and remains a touchstone today for prominent anti-immigration hardliners such as Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon.
Right.
Build the wall.
Right. So we have this divide in the United States. What is the idea of the United States? Is it a place where we take everybody from anywhere? You're tired, you're whatever, you're huddled masses, things of that nature. I should know that line, but I don't because our education system in the United States is...
Crikey dingo.
You're teaching it.
I know. I'm trying my best. The problem is that we're so under-resourced that it's impossible to teach.
Our Italian grandparents took advantage of that and came over on the boat.
Right, they did.
Yes.
So we have this idea that the United States is this, place where we have this freedom to do what we want. But you have to understand that at the time, right, who were these people looking for freedom? It was white people looking for freedom of religion. And so there's this idea that the United States is that white person's Jesus, free to praise God however you feel necessary, right? Freedom of religion. And we want to hold those values. And those values are questionable, but we want to conserve those values. Now, on the other hand, we have the idea that the United States is, and this is my personal view, I suppose, but I think it's a view that other people might hold as well. Maybe not to the same extent that I do, but here we go. My view is that the United States is this place where anybody can come and be a United States citizen, and it shouldn't be that hard to do. From my perspective, if you are over here in the United States, congratulations, you're living the American dream. You're an American, right? Now, if you want to go through all the paperwork, and get the documentation, great, and all that stuff, but it should be much easier, from my perspective.
Well, yeah, and become naturalized. You take the test, you study.
Right. But the thing is, we also have to agree on some social norms. Now, the problem is that there's a concern, or it's not really a concern, it's a rallying cry from people who don't want, things like Islamic law to rule the United States, right? That was a big thing when Barack Obama was, running for president.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that?
Why do you think 1 in 4 think that he is a Muslim?
Because of his actions, since he became president has been pandering to the Islamic world, apologizing on behalf of America to the Islamic world.
What would that even look like? I'm sure we would we wouldn't allow it to happen. It just wouldn't happen. Look what's happening in Iran. That's the thing. There's too many people here that would say, no, we're not going to have Islamic law. It just is not going to work because it's the same rules I have in my classroom. I tell my students, look, you can do whatever you want as long as you don't violate the rights of anybody else. And that's really the rule.
But then on the flip side, there are a lot of people that are wanting Christian law. Christian nationalism, Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example. Mm-hmm. And it's just as bad. Look at what they're doing right now with Roe versus Wade with women.
Right.
Telling women what they can and cannot do with their bodies.
Right.
Just like what they do in Iran.
Right.
The thing that scares me about critical race theory and the white replacement theory is that we have these ultra MAGA white supremacist idiots embrace this and feed off each other's fear without any kind of an education whatsoever about the Great Replacement and blacks are now outnumbering the whites and et cetera, et cetera. The recent shootings, El Paso in Walmart, 23 people died. The Buffalo, New York, 10 people died?
Something like that.
10 people died. In New Zealand, they have their trouble too. This is all over the world.
It's not just limited to the United States.
Right. In New Zealand, 51 people were killed and 40 were wounded by these crazed white supremacist freaks that think they're doing a service by killing random people because of the Great Replacement theory.
So who are those people killing before it was just random people because white replacement theory? What was their target?
Well, I would assume right now people of color.
Abortion clinics.
That's right. I remember back in the 90s. An abortion doctor was killed, and people were wanting to blow up and bomb Planned Parenthood. And I remember that, yes.
They lost their rallying cry. It's no longer about abortion anymore because they kind of screwed the pooch on that. And now it's about critical race theory and the white replacement theory. So now they have a new rallying cry, and they have all these crazies that are like, great, I can be the one to solve this problem.
Do you remember in 2017 in Charlottesville, the riots between Black Lives Matter, the shirt that I'm wearing, versus the white supremacists? And they were
made famous by the tiki torches.
Right. They were chanting, "You will not replace us," and "Jews will not replace us," which President Trump then said there are fine people on both sides.
Right.
You also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
Wow. Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham from Fox News have perpetuated this white replacement theory on their television shows.
Right.
And have, I think, thrown fuel on the fire.
Well, and Tucker Carlson even, mocked people for getting angry at his white replacement theory, saying that they were calling him racist, and he's like, I'm just pointing out that we're not. And he did his little, I'm a little weasel kind of dance.
I know that the left and all the little gatekeepers on Twitter become literally hysterical if you use the term replacement, if you suggest that the Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate, the voters now casting ballots, with new people, more obedient voters from the third world. Let's just say it, that's true.
Jews will not replace us!
In 2017, there was a House of Representatives dude from Iowa named Steve King, and he tweeted, "We can't restore our civilization without somebody else's babies." In 2019, the theory was referenced by a prominent far-right French politician named Marine Le Pen. Tucker Carlson and other Fox News hosts began making repeated references to the replacement theory in their segments on immigration. And I remember the whole Build the Wall thing and the Haitians in Texas at the border.
Can we talk about immigration for just one moment?
Well, yeah, this is a huge factor in the replacement theory.
Right. And so let's look at is there really a problem with immigration? What does immigration look like right now, and why do they think there's a problem? Well, let's break it down. Here's from what I can remember, and I'm sure someone will fact check me on this. Hopefully they will. Do your diligence.
To help Tim out so that he doesn't get fact-checked by somebody watching or listening to the show.
No, I want to point out that we're fact-checking ourselves like people should do.
But he was pretty good about this. This legislation regarding the 3% law restricted new immigration to 3% of the number of residents per year from their country of origin already living in the United States. The 1910 census would be used to determine who was already here. This means if there were 10,000 Italians in the census, only 300 per year could enter.
Mamma mia. Yeah.
We made it in.
We did. The United States, after like World War I or World War II, I think it was World War I, was getting a big influx of immigrants from like Germany and Europe and all that. So we had a lot of immigrants coming in. People didn't like that. So they passed this law called the 3% law, or I'm sure it had some other name, but it was the 3% law, which means 3% of the immigrants coming in that's how much you get for your country. Like 3% of the whole immigration to the United States can only be from one country. You can't have more. And so what that did is it limited the amount of immigrants coming in from Europe at the time because of the wars and such. I think like the 60s. The president at the time, I guess, would be Reagan.
In the 60s? He was 80s. 60s was John F. Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson, Richard Nixon.
Maybe it was Nixon. It might have been Nixon. Somebody.
The Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965 abolished the earlier quota system based on national origin and established a new immigration policy. It was President Lyndon B. Johnson who signed it into law.
Symbolically got rid of the law. But here's the thing. We had this influx of immigrants that was needed from Europe, and that need went down over time, right? Because there was no more fighting, and there were no more refugees, and no more need for immigration. But it flared up down in South America, right? We had violence in Venezuela, violence in Honduras, violence, all over the place down there. And so the need, the immigrant need shifted from European to South American. It's the same amount, just from a different location. But since we got rid of that 3% rule, now we don't have a limit on how many immigrants we take from each individual country. And that's where we get this influx of immigrants, because all of a sudden we see a huge group coming, and it's like we no longer can limit them to just say 3%. It's, sure, come on in.
That makes sense.
Which is the way it should be, from my perspective. I mean, it's funny that you see all these people talking about, how we have this huge immigration problem, yet we go to Red Robin and they can't keep an employee longer than 2 weeks.
After working in the restaurant industry for so many years, I now understand when they say that there are certain jobs that white people just won't do, and it's true.
Right.
The bussing of the tables, the gardening, the taking care of the babies, the labor. Just, I get it. And people from South America are very hardworking people, and they're very family-based, community-based. That's their heart. That's their gold, their culture.
Right.
And they take care of each other. How many people have you known that were Hispanic that would make money here and send it back to Mexico?
Well, it's a different culture, right?
Totally. No wonder with the extreme conservative media and scaring people with the people coming over our border. They're rapists, they're murderers. Thank you, President Trump. No wonder things like critical race theory have become another rallying cry, another platform, another hot topic.
Right.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
Well, you look at what President Trump did, Donald Trump. I hate saying President Trump. President Pussy Grabber is what I should call him, because that's what we allow, right? President Pussy Grabber did a lot of bad things for immigrants. He built a wall that was just a waste of money and time.
And who was
resources.
pocketing that money?
Right?
Steve Bannon.
Right.
Oh gosh.
So and then they passed all these immigration laws, and that was a rallying cry for the last thing, and they did something about it, and it was kind of a disaster, to be honest with you. So now they need something else to latch onto that's going to be the driving force behind their next election thing, and it's critical race theory, because think of the children.
Yes, we got to protect them. We had to protect the children. Skylar, Destiny, Bella.
Do you think that there should be rules about what is taught in school?
Oh, absolutely.
What wouldn't you like to see taught in school?
There's critical race theory.
Yeah, that critical race theory, as soon as I heard about that, I'm like, why are we doing this?
What is critical race theory?
I don't know. I haven't.
Right.
So now we have critical race theory laws that have been passed.
Yeah, so here are some examples. Governor Youngkin in Virginia used critical race theory as a platform to get votes and called it an excellence in education, which is stupid, because how is that making your... I mean, I get it. I get what he's doing there. He's saying, look, we're making our education excellent by getting rid of critical race theory because it's damaging our kids, and we're going to teach, the right history. And of course he won. And as soon as he did, he ordered the Department of Education to conduct a review, and he even started a hotline so... oh, my God. Did he really? He started a hotline so aggravated parents could call and provide tips and examples of its implementation in the classroom. I'd be fucked. I'd be absolutely fucked.
Yeah.
I am so political in my classroom, and it's not Republican or Democrat. It's just pointing out the bullshit. And then the problem is a lot of the bullshit on the right. I mean, there's bullshit on the left too, but holy cow. I mean, literally, holy cow, it's squatting on us and shit all over the place with the Republican Party. That's a lot of swear words.
So to not anger any white privileged parents, you have to teach Caitlin and Destiny and Bella that some slavery was not so bad.
Well, it's not so bad. I think the idea is they want you to approach it from all the perspectives. Slavery is what built this country, and without it, we wouldn't have all of these things, right?
Some people would disagree with you on that based on its merit. It built the cotton industry.
It did. Oh, sure, it built the cotton industry.
Yeah.
What about the tobacco industry?
Exactly. But the industry still thrived long after the abolition.
Right.
Long after, it still thrived after. It's still the cotton and tobacco industry still thrived after the Civil War and after Abraham Lincoln abolished slavery.
Right.
It didn't end because slavery ended. They just had to pay their employees a fair wage, but it wasn't fair.
Right,
but they were no longer being whipped and murdered and killed and
right. But one might
raped.
say that it was the fact that we went through that whole process that was able to be our origin. But the problem is that if we focus on that as our origin, we look terrible. So let's just say that Abe Lincoln freed the slaves.
Moving on
The
to
end.
World War I. Yeah. Bypassing Juneteenth, like my education.
Right. I had no idea Juneteenth was a thing.
Right. Yes. Same here.
It doesn't matter that critical race theory is taught at the college level. Conservatives are using it as a fear-mongering platform. Well, yeah. In Tennessee, for example, lawmakers have banned any instructions that make students feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or another form of psychological distress. So they've banned math.
Oh, no. Bella, Caitlin, what are we going to do?
I hate that you didn't laugh at my joke. It was
Destiny.
so good.
Well, it's funny, but oh no, we got to protect the children.
Right.
They don't have any responsibility with what happened 200 years ago. Why should they feel guilty?
Well, the problem is that you can argue that any instruction is going to make a student feel that, because discomfort and anguish and psychological distress are three cornerstones of learning.
Well, that's school in general. Look what happened to me last term at Portland State. I was nearly broken down because of the discomfort I was feeling by being a middle-aged man returning to academia.
That is true. In Florida, DeSantis. He signed the Individual Freedom Measure, which banned educators from teaching certain topics related to race and designed, in part, to prevent teachers from making students feel guilt or shame about their race because of historical events. And again, why are we assuming, that kids are feeling this overwhelming guilt?
What's the most important issue in the governor's race here in Virginia?
Getting back to the basics of teaching children, not teaching them critical race theory.
And what is critical race theory?
Well, I'm not going to get into the specifics of it because I don't understand it that much, but it's something that what little bit that I know I don't care for.
And what have you heard that you don't?
Well,
that you don't like?
I'm not going to. I don't have that much knowledge on it, but It's something that I don't care for.
It doesn't make any sense to me.
I don't think they are. I didn't when I was learning about slavery in high school.
Right.
Because there were good people that were Caucasian, the abolitionists, that helped. There were numerous Caucasians that helped and contributed to the freedom of slaves. It's to be celebrated that people that were different colors were participating and died in the North versus South in the Civil War so that they could be freed.
Mm-hmm.
So they are to be celebrated. They're heroes. The South put up the statues of their Southern heroes.
Whoa. The Civil War was about states' rights, not about slavery.
It depends on how you look at it.
That's right. It's about the lens, right? So again, going back to this,
it was all about. Okay, it was about.
We could talk about facts. We could talk about anything we want, but at the end of the day, and I want to bring us back because
talk about states' rights, money.
But I want to come back. Right, but I want to come back to what we're talking about here, because we're getting into all the little history details. The history doesn't matter. They don't want to teach the history because you're right. It's about control. Right? And it's about money, and it's about keeping them in power so they can keep making money. So when it comes to critical race theory, I don't really think that anybody knows what it is. Hear me out.
Right?
Hear me out. I was watching, while I was doing research, this guy. I don't know his name. I don't care to know his name. I just know he's full of shit. And here's why. Because he took critical race theory and he meshed it in, and he might be right historically, who knows, but within things like Marxism and socialism and the Soviet Union and all this terrible stuff that makes it sound really terrifying. And then he comes in and says, and here are some examples. And we can recognize, he says this, we can recognize that there's still some systemic problems in our community that put people of color at a disadvantage, but we can't ignore that critical race theory also does this and this and this, so we have to get rid of it all. And then he uses some examples of how it's being taught now, and he gives an example of a third grade class, and we can pull them up somewhere, a third grade class where the teacher had the students break down their race and sexual identity and then rate themselves according to their race and sexual identity. And now, that's a bit extreme. And I can understand that. But that's been around for a very long time. Even in my Catholic school, I remember in first grade my teacher doing not the exact same lesson, but a very similar one, where we all looked at the color of our eyes, mainly because we had no black people in my class. And those with brown eyes had to go to one side of the room, and those with blue eyes were on the other side of the room, and those with the blue eyes and the green eyes and some of the other colors, they got cupcakes. In 1992, Jane Elliott was a prominent educator, anti-racist activist, and she went on the Oprah Winfrey Show to demonstrate her lesson where she separates the audience by eye color, brown eye versus blue eye. It just shows how easy it is to teach prejudice in a simple sitting, in a simple way. And I remember that being done to me when I was in first grade.
I want every white person in this room who would be happy to be treated as this society in general treats our citizens, our black citizens. If you, as a white person, would be happy to receive the same treatment that our black citizens do in this society, please stand. You didn't understand the directions. If you white folks want to be treated the way blacks are in this society, stand. Nobody's standing here. That says very plainly that you know what's happening. You know you don't want it for you. I want to know why you're so willing to accept it or to allow it to happen for others.
And so this lesson that they're all freaking out about, which, yeah, maybe it's a bit extreme, is nothing new. It's the same story, same thing. So this guy, he takes critical race theory and says that critical race theory, by its principle, says that the United States is not redeemable, and it has to be replaced through economic and social reform, so on and so forth. And that's a problem.
Okay, so let's play this clip.
Okay, let's play this clip.
This video clip is by Christopher Rufo, who is a writer, filmmaker and political activist. He has directed documentaries for PBS, Netflix and continues to cover critical race theory, poverty, homelessness, addiction, crime, and other afflictions.
Many liberals, moderates, and conservatives have failed to separate critical race theory's premise from its conclusion. The premise of critical race theory is quite simple. America has a history of slavery, racism, and injustice, and we should examine the relationship between racism, power, and society. This is undoubtedly true. Nobody taking an honest look at American history could deny it. But the critical race theorist's conclusion that the American regime is irredeemably racist and must be overthrown through moral, political, and economic revolution is false. But the critical race theorists use their premise as a bludgeon, bullying people into accepting their conclusions. This is dishonest and manipulative.
So what he did there is he attached the extreme to the many. He said, here is the first part of the Marxism, and then once people believe that, most often they believe that then the government needs to be overthrown by whatever has to be replaced. It connects everybody or most people to the extreme, and that's just not it. But that happens on the left too. But also the problem is that the extreme is becoming, a little more normal, and so we wind up with like MAGA situations, right? And so you have to wonder, maybe the right extreme is a little too extreme, and they're maybe doing a little damage.
Rick Scott of Florida proposed a plan. I wish I had enough copies to hand, but go online and look at it. I really mean this is serious, because you're going to be hard for you to believe. Proposed a plan requiring Congress to vote on the future of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid every 5 years.
Starting today, on this February 1st, small amounts of illegal drugs will now be decriminalized in the state of Oregon. And this is because of Measure 110. Voters passed it in November. Selling and manufacturing drugs is still illegal, but starting today, if someone is caught with small amounts of drugs like heroin and cocaine, they will only get a ticket that comes with a $100 fine.
Right. What do we know now that we didn't know back then, that changes our views of how we behaved back then and makes our community better now by changing those behaviors? That's the difference between a conservative and a progressive. I don't want to say a conservative and a Democrat, because that's not what it is. A conservative wants to keep those values and not change the past and how we got there. They want to keep what we had because it's working for them. The progressive idea says we're going to look at the past and examine what we did, what worked, but who got hurt, and how can we fix it so that we're not causing harm to any communities, I suppose.
Right.
I mean, that's the general idea. That's what we want to teach our children, at least I hope. But then you have these crazies on the right that say, make your men monsters, make your little boys monsters, teach them to be assholes, teach them to be, teach them to fight. And it's just like, why? Why do we need so much aggression? Why do we have so much white fragility? What is going on, Rick?
And the white rage.
What's going on with white rage? Why do we need white rage? I really like what our local news is doing. They're breaking down and fact-checking the political ads. Some of them are really extreme. They talk about Christine Drees and how she's backed by the right-wing Republican militias, and she's a Trumpy and things like that.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stuff in there is just reaching really far. And I know that. But I'm so bombarded by these commercials, and it's the same with on the other side, the ones going against Tina Kotek, right? A lot of those claims are just reaching out, right? Saying, well, maybe if you make this connection, maybe you can deduce this.
Right.
And it's just so much bullshit. And then you turn on to Fox News and MSNBC and CNN, and it's the same bullshit 24/7
on a global scale.
Scale, all the time. So we wonder, like, how much of the extremes and how much of these problems are being exacerbated by the media, because that's what sells.
Right, extremes always
extremes, and that's what people are gravitating towards at this point because it's so accessible. One more thing Ron DeSantis did, and let's not forget that he did this because it's just ridiculous.
This discussion continues in Part 2.
Okay, so on this episode of Let's Trigger Rictor, racism ended with MLK Day. Do you think that racism ended with MLK Day, with Martin Luther King?
There's no more racism.
No?
I watch Fox News.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That's why we need to have critical race theory. Not have critical race theory.
Right.
No, racism will be here long after we are.
Sure. It always will be.
Yeah, and that
sucks.
Yeah. And in the United States, it's white against any person of color.
Yes.
And gender.
Yes.
And pronouns. What I hate about racism, yes, it is taught and nurtured, starting at home and then with peer groups.
Sure.
And bigger circles.
Exactly.
No. It's bullshit. You see that, don't you? Yeah. You gotta watch out for that. Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. I will. Good boy. Proud of you. Yeah, don't worry about it. Got it.
When it comes to the N-word, when it's, as you talk about it, I guess kids use it with the and if you end it with the hard R, it's hate. Pejoratives like that serve no purpose in bettering yourself.
Well, what was the point of the word? It was to objectify the people and make them so they're not human.
And I understand people of color use it quite freely in their music and in their vernacular with their friends and family. And that is their right. I would never correct a person of color from saying, you can't say that with the or the No. As a gay man, I say FAG a lot when I'm angry and at my straight friends.
Yeah,
never
you say it to me a lot.
Never to my gay friends. My gay friends, I call them bitch or girl. Gay jargon.
Sure.
I use the FAG word, I flip it and reverse it and throw it back in a fun, playful manner. Is that right? No. You know, it's and
no. My thing with it is what it comes down to is when you give something a name that isn't what it is, when you give it, a different identity, you're dehumanizing it, right? So the use of the N-word, the use of the B word, any sort of word that objectifies somebody makes them no longer human. And what do we do? What's easy to do with objects? Destroy, throw away, break them up, break them apart. And so that's my issue with that whole thing. And I think all of the hate and stuff will still persist as long as we're objectifying people and assigning them names. So, sure, the N-word is their word.
Well, how many
and I'm not
people...
going to have an opinion on whether or not they should use it. I'm just going to have the same opinion I have with any sort of word that objectifies anybody and say, if you're objectifying somebody, then you're dehumanizing them, and it makes it easier to just discard them. So that's what you're doing. That's the intent.
If you ever hear a student use that word,
I hear it all the time.
Possibly use this method in teaching them an alternative to using it. This is my suggestion, if I have one.
Okay.
I try to live by this. I don't always. It's like having a relationship with God. You have to work at it every single day. It's like a relationship with your wife. You work at it every single day. And being a better person and choosing not to use the FAG word or the N word is to be a better person. And it takes work. You're just not a better person overnight. You got to work at it and keep in mind the pain it has caused. How many people have died?
My students don't care.
The reason people are concerned about the words they use, the reason Americans care about civil rights, the reason we are sensitive to racism is for one issue and one issue only, and that is how black Americans were treated in this country. It is because of the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. Those do not compare. Irish, the new groups, they always get a little bad treatment. Do not compare that to how blacks are treated in this country. You don't get to piggyback on the black experience in America.
How many people have died hearing that as the last word, as the last thing they're
Probably
called?
a lot.
Thousands.
Mm-hmm.
Both FAG, the B word when it comes to women, the C word when it comes to women, and the N word
when it comes to our people of color.
So, Maya Angelou is one of my personal mentors in life, and she says, words are things. They get into your upholstery, your hair, and eventually into you. And it's true, because you never forget how a person makes you feel.
Right.
Words are things, I'm convinced. You must be careful about the words you use, or the words you allow to be used in your house. In the Old Testament, we are told in Genesis that in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was God, and the Word was with God. That's in Genesis. Words are things. You must be careful. Careful about calling people out of their names, using racial pejoratives and sexual pejoratives and all that ignorance. Don't do that. Someday we'll be able to measure the power of words. I think they are things. I think they get on the walls. They get in your wallpaper. They get in your rugs, in your upholstery, in your clothes, and finally into you.
So at the end of the day, no, racism did not end with him. Okay. It's still here and it will always be here.
She came and rang the bell, and I opened the door, and she said, Sister Martin Luther King is dead. I fell into a depression I'd never known before. What on earth had happened to my country?